Today we're looking at the required practical for testing reaction times from GCSE Biology Paper 2 for Combined and Triple Science. And as always, we'll have a look at the question first and then we'll break down the mark scheme and build a full marks answer. Okay, so let's have a look at this question. It is our reaction times based required practical. So it's our required practical for the homeostasis and response module. And effectively, with this question, they are not giving us a great amount of information to go on because there are different versions of this question. So it's a common one that turns up quite frequently in exams, but they have different ways of sort of approaching this question and making it into a 6-marker. So with this particular version, we've got this one. So students investigated reaction time using a ruler drop test, described the method they could use, and explain how they could make the results more reliable. So other versions maybe, they could, the method one, it's a very, very common one. There's usually one on every exam where they'll give you a 6-mark question relating to building a method. But there's different versions of this question where you're having to make a method in what information they give you first. It could be that maybe they show you the equipment and ask you to just plan an experiment using that equipment. In this example, they are just naming it as a ruler drop test, but they are also giving you a small diagram to sort of give you a couple of hints towards what you actually have to do in the experiment. That's a bit of an extra little bonus. It makes it slightly easier, but not a great deal. And this as well, describing the method, but also making sure that you say how they could make it better. So it's like, what would your method be, but how could you make it better as well? It's a double command word question. So we've got a describe and an explain. So effectively breaking this down into these two little pieces, we are going to need to just come up with a description for the method. That's sort of the easier part of it, but then it's the explaining how you make it more reliable. So in the second part of it, you're not just saying what changes you could make to make it more reliable or what you could do to make it more reliable. You're also having to say why, because it's an explain command word in there. So it's a bit of a multi-layered question. So we'll have a look at this one. I will go through a process that is going to sort of plot this out for us and get us from the beginning to the end and hitting all 6 marks. And before we start, if you'd like to give this question a go first and see how many marks you can get before we look at the mark scheme and build a full marks answer, you can pause the video now. And if there is a topic that you're particularly worried about losing marks on, let me know in the comments so that I can cover it in future videos. All right, let's have a look at this mark scheme then. Now, this is the first time that we have come up with one of these types of mark schemes on one of my videos, so I will go through what this actually means first, because it's a very, very, very common sort of set out and a layout that they get for examiners for when they're marking these kinds of questions where you're having to write methods and things like that. It's the most common sort of mark scheme that you will get for method-based questions. So it is split into effectively 4 levels. So you can see on the right-hand side here, it's how many marks you are going to be attributed for each of these levels. And each of the levels has sort of a description of what your method needs to be awarded this many marks. Obviously, if you don't have anything relevant at all, like maybe somebody leaves the question empty or they write about something completely different, or maybe not really quite getting it what they're supposed to be doing, then they'll get no marks. But then at level 1, you need a basic statement about the ruler drop test or reliability is given. Information is limited and it might be poorly organized. So it's maybe someone can't quite remember what is happening in the experiment, but they kind of know what it is about dropping a ruler to test reaction times. So they make a couple of statements about it. Student dropped the ruler and caught it, measured the amount of time, the amount of distance maybe, then they'd be hitting this 1 or 2 marks. And then at level 2, you need a simple method being described with some explanation of reliability, but there might be missing detail or minor inaccuracies. So kind of getting around the right gist, saying a method that is close to being right, but not quite all the way there. Mentioning how maybe some ways that you could make it better, but not massively amounts of detail. Or maybe getting a couple of things wrong. That's where you're getting into your 3 and 4 marks. And then finally, for the one we're looking for, level 3, You need a detailed method, and it's described, and there's a clear explanation of how reliable results could be obtained. Scientific terminology is used appropriately, and the sequence is logical. So basically, you're getting a completely accurate method is what you're aiming for this 5 and 6 marks. If you get it completely bang on and you hit everything, you get 6 marks. Maybe you miss one thing, 1 or 2, then you're going down into the 5 marks. Because again, it's like 5 to 6 or 3 to 4 or 1 to 2. It's like a top end and lower end of this. So if you're getting a couple of bits missing, you can still get up to 5 marks, but you need everything for that 6. And that's kind of a key point there about the sequence being logical. So you've got to make sure that it's in the right order effectively, because you could be putting things, you could sort of be hitting all of this stuff, but maybe it's in the wrong order and it doesn't make sense. And the way that I sort of like to describe these kind of method questions is, could you give your method at the end? So once you've finished all of your method, if you look through it again, have another quick read through it. If you handed that method to somebody who'd never seen this experiment before, maybe, I don't know, from another planet, they don't do biology, they don't know what a required practical is, and you give them this method and you give them a ruler, and could they do this experiment? Anyway, indicative content. So this is the second half of our mark scheme. The next sort of part of these big mark scheme blocks is indicative content, being the things that they are looking for that you mention in your answer. It's not a case of you have to get every single one of these points into your answer, but these are the things that are right effectively. These are what they are looking for. The more and more and more and more of these that you're hitting, the higher and higher you're going up in this sort of tier of levels. So I'm not going to read through all of these, so we can sort of do the answer, then we can see what we've ticked off at the end, and we can sort of compare the two to see if we've hit enough of them to get to that top level. So what we want to do is start off and actually think about what is happening in the practical. We have a ruler and we're dropping it, holding it at the bottom at 0, and then we're dropping it, and then the person is grabbing it as quick as they can and then measuring how many centimeters have passed until they grabbed it. Like I said before, there's different versions where you could use time involved and actually measuring times and stuff like that. But for this particular version, we're just using the actual distance from 0 to wherever it is that they grabbed hold of it. It's a really simple experiment, just dropping a ruler and grabbing it, but this bit's about making it more reliable and stuff like that. That is where all of these extra marks are going to come from, because just describing dropping a ruler and grabbing it isn't going to get us very far. So the way it is like, say, one student and another student doing it, because just to get rid of that one from the start, that inaccuracy will be the same person dropping it and catching it. They know when they're going to drop it, and it just completely would distort the results of it. So you need 2 students to do it. And it's a bit of a clue there, and they're saying that students, that's one way I like to remember that. Right, so we've got student A, so one student. I mean, I'd maybe avoid, see, like in the mark scheme, we've got one student holds a ruler vertically. I'd say student A. I'm going to bullet point these as well so that it helps us to sort of see our structure and everything. So we're going to play through from the beginning. Student A is holding the ruler vertically, because, I mean, we've got it there in our picture. Holds the ruler vertically. And then we'll say what student B is going to do. So you can see it in the picture. I mean, the picture is slightly misleading in that they should be holding it further down here, so don't get caught out by that. Student B, so we'll say student A holds the ruler vertically, and then student B should we, let's see, I've put a BE. Student B places the thumb and finger. I'll go with thumb and finger open around the ruler at 0 centimeters, ready to catch it. So student A holds the ruler vertically, and then student B places the thumb and finger open around the ruler at 0 centimeters, ready to catch it. Sorry about my writing there. That was with thinking and writing at the same time. So we've got this set up. We have described what is happening in this picture. The student A is holding it. Student B has the fingers open, ready to catch it. So next thing, we need to talk about the actual dropping of the ruler. So this is where we need to think about starting to introduce some control variables and things like that. Because again, with a method question, we also need to make sure that we're having our independent variables, control, and dependent. So we need to have all of these things in our method. Otherwise, it's not going to work properly when we're looking at these 5 and 6 mark answers. What we'll do is start mentioning that. So student A will drop the ruler without warning. Because that's really important, is that the person catching it doesn't know when it's going to drop, so that the results are controlled. So we've got one of our sort of controls in there already, in that a separate person is dropping it. And then we'll expand on this point. So student A drops the ruler without warning, and student B will catch it as quickly as possible. So we've got student A will drop the ruler without warning. Student B will catch it as quickly as possible, because we need to drop the ruler, person needs to catch it, then we can measure the reaction time. So we're saying what each of those students is doing at the start. Student A is doing this, and then student B does this, student A does this, student B does this. So then we're getting into the ruler has been dropped and they've caught it. So now we need to get on to what we're actually measuring. So we want to make sure that we are mentioning our equipment in there as well. So what we'll do now is measure the distance. So measure the distance from 0 centimeters, because that is where they was holding it before, to where student B, just naming him again, grabbed the ruler. So measure the distance from 0 centimeters to where student B grabbed the ruler. So that is our measurement. So now we've got like a piece of data, maybe 5 centimeters. So now what we need to do is say what that actually means. What does that measurement mean? Because we need to sort of explain what's happening and describe what's happening. So we'll say what the measurement actually means. A shorter distance means a faster reaction time. There we go. So a shorter distance means a faster reaction time. That is effectively the whole practical. So before we get on to the next part of that, I'll just annotate some small bits on here. So shorter distance means a faster reaction time. That is kind of why we're doing the whole practical, because we can measure a distance, and the shorter it is, the faster the reaction time. That's what it's asking us to sort of investigate in the whole question. This bit in here about student A dropping the ruler without warning, student B catching it as quickly as possible. This is one of our control variables. So I'm just making sure that we've highlighted that. And then we've also got our dependent, so this bit. So we're measuring. So it's our dependent. So we've got two of our variables there. So the only thing that's actually missing from this is your independent variable. So that is something that we could maybe factor into how you could make the results more reliable. You could add in different changes and stuff, because there are different things that we can approach with this. So maybe a different question would have independent variables in there, where you could be changing things like substances or amounts of sleep or loud music playing in the background to see if that affects them, things where people aren't concentrating. So there's a couple of different versions of the question, like I said before, where independent variables could be more important. But we've described how they could, the method that they could use to do the experiment. So effectively, we've done that bit, but now we need to explain how they could make the results more reliable. And the most sort of easy word, I mean, whatever the experiment is, the number one sort of thing that you should always go to is to do the experiment more times, calculate a mean, find anomalies. It's improving the validity of your results. So that's where I'm going to go first with this. So I'm going to repeat the experiment multiple times. So repeat the experiment multiple times, and I'm not going to leave it there because that's not enough to say what the reason for that is, because we need to explain everything that we've done. We've given our thing we could do about repeating it more times, but we've got to say why that's useful. So we could repeat the experiment multiple times. The bit that's missing from that is calculate a mean. So we need to calculate a mean. This is a good point on this as well. Don't ever say that you're doing it to make it a fair test, because a lot of the times it's either not on you, or it will. I've seen it explicitly stated to not accept, the reason being that it's a fair test. You've just got to say about it increasing the validity of the results and identifying anomalies. That's the whole reason why we do this. We want to do it more times and calculate a mean, just because it reduces the chance of anomalous results. So repeat the experiment multiple times and calculate a mean to identify and ignore anomalous results. Because we don't want them skewing our data and making everything inaccurate. So what other things could we do to improve the experiment? So other things they could do to improve the experiment. The actual equipment, that's always like a good point to start with whenever we're talking about making an experiment reliable, is using the same equipment every time. So I'm just going to say use the same ruler every time. But I'm also going to explain why, because that's what we need to do. Use the same ruler every time. To ensure consistent drop speed. Because if it's different weights, different materials, it could fall faster. I mean, that covers it anyway, so that'll do. So use the same ruler every time to ensure consistent drop speed. And then the only other one is about student A. Make sure, I'm just going to add this on so I don't run out of lines. Make sure that student A drops the ruler at random. At random, without warning. that'll do for that one. Make sure that student A drops the ruler at random without any warning. Again, that's improving our accuracy, because if they give them a heads up and say, right, you ready, then that's giving them a clue that it's about to drop, and it's going to make them react a bit faster. So doing it without warning, that's always like a really good plus point if you're writing a method for this experiment. So we could also mention about this. So we've got our control, we've got our dependent. So I am just going to add independent variable in here anyway, because it's going to improve our experiment. We're talking about making it more reliable, but it's an improvement either way. So what we could do is say the students, because I'm just adding this on as an extra onto the end, are not sort of part of our initial method, because we're saying a suggestion of what they could also do. So I'm going to start it by saying the students could also compare reaction times before and after consuming caffeine. To measure how it affects reaction speed. Done. Right, yeah. So the students could also compare the reaction times before and after consuming caffeine to measure how it affects reaction speed or reaction time, whatever you prefer. So that's our independent just mentioned, because it's just nice to add in. I've got a couple of lines there to use up, so I might as well just add it in anyway, because it can always add some extra marks if it's in the mark scheme like it is with this particular one. So there we are. We have everything in there. We'll go through this list now and see how many of these we've actually covered in this answer. But we've gone from just describing what's happening in the picture. We've got our two students dropping a ruler, the other students catching it, measuring the distance from 0 to where they grabbed hold of it as our data for our reaction time, and then doing it multiple times, calculating a mean to get rid of any anomalies. Maybe they just wasn't paying attention and they grabbed it and it went to 15. That would be a really big anomaly. So it'd help us to identify where things have gone wrong and get rid of those. And then we've also mentioned why we're actually doing it, what we need to see to come up with a conclusion from it. By saying the shorter distance means a faster reaction time. And we've also mentioned a couple of improvements or a couple of reliability-based suggestions, and then also a suggestion how we could do it next time with a different independent variable or with an independent variable in there. So let's have a look then. We'll tick these off as we go through. So one student holds a ruler vertically, we got that. Another student places the thumb and finger at the bottom of the ruler near the 0 centimetre mark, we got that. The ruler's dropped without warning, so that came in our this bit right at the bottom where we was saying about like reliability. So we got that. The student catches the ruler as quickly as possible. We did say that somewhere. It was this bit where we was mentioning about, oh, there it is. Student A drops the ruler without warning. Student B catches it as quickly as possible. So we were saying that in our actual setup. The distance the ruler falls before being caught is recorded. That I think I maybe implied it, but it was in this bit about measuring the distance. So we've not specifically said about recording the result, but we have kind of covered that. I'm not going to tick it just anyway, but by saying that we're doing the experiment multiple times, calculating the mean, we are implying that we're recording this data. So the shorter the distance means a faster reaction time. We said that. Results can be repeated. Yeah, we did that. A mean could be calculated. We did that. Anomalous results. We said that because this is part of this and it should always be together. The same ruler being used each time. The same hand or starting position could be used. So we said about the same ruler, the same starting position, because even though we explicitly didn't say about the starting position being the same each time in those words, we did actually say around the ruler at 0 centimeters. So we have given a specific place where they need to hold that ruler. So we have done that. The same person could drop the ruler each time. That's a dubious one because we have said student A and student B rather than a student. So I think that does cover it because we are naming specific people doing these tasks. So I'm giving that. Students should avoid giving clues before dropping the ruler. We did that. Results could be compared before and after a stimulus such as caffeine or a distraction. We've done that as well. The only extra sort of point on here is accept references to converting distance fallen into reaction time using a conversion chart or equation. So that is something that you could also mention in there. It's not 100% necessary. So that does get us right to the very top at level 6. We've used all of our scientific terminology. We're talking about anomalies. We're talking about repeating the experiments, identifying anomalous results, calculating means. That is giving us everything that we need to make sure we're using scientific terminology. And the sequence is logical because it's all in the right order, because we just described step by step what is happening when we do that practical. So there is no sort of deviance in there where you could be going into doing things in the wrong order and mentioning things the wrong way around. So that is everything. That's a full marks answer. And if you follow that step by step and you get a question about making a method for this practical, you'll be right up there at the top of level 3. And hopefully that made the structure of the answer a little bit clearer, and it showed you exactly what the examiner is looking for on this question. And if the video helped, give it a like, because it really helps the channel to reach more students that are also revising for their exams. And if you know somebody who needs help with this particular topic, feel free to share this video with them and check out these other GCSE science walkthroughs that are on screen now. Thanks for watching and good luck.